9 years. That's how long it took. 9 years of brown bag lunches, of skipping vacations while friends posted pictures from beaches, of buying used furniture instead of replacing things when they broke. 9 years of telling myself that someday, all this sacrifice would add up to something bigger. And now here I was, standing on the porch of my own bungalow with the keys still warm in my palm. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a small yard that was mine to mow or let grow wild. I had toured dozens of houses, always worrying that I was reaching too far, but this one felt right. Modest, manageable mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was squeezing my life into the corners of shared apartments or borrowed spaces. This place wasn't a compromise. It was the reward for discipline, for determination, for quietly refusing to give up even when it would have been easier to settle. I remember standing there, taking in the crisp Bend, Oregon air, feeling as though my lungs could finally expand fully. The house wasn't huge. It wasn't glamorous. But it represented something bigger than square footage or curb appeal. It was proof that I could build stability for myself without leaning on anyone else. Proof that all the choices I had made, choices that sometimes felt lonely and joyless, had not been wasted. It's hard to explain the pride that swells up when you unlock a door that no one else has the right to open. The doorknob turned smoothly under my hand, as if the house itself was welcoming me. My diploma, my savings account statements, my budget spreadsheets, they weren't abstract sacrifices anymore. They had solidified into walls, into a roof, into a space where I could finally breathe and belong. There's a certain quiet joy in imagining the life ahead. Dinners cooked in your own kitchen, mornings where sunlight slips through windows you chose, evenings where the silence is yours alone to fill. For once, my mind wasn't buzzing with worry about rent increases, unreliable roommates, or someone else dictating my schedule. This house was my anchor. I stood there a little longer than necessary, my fingers tightening around the keys. Part of me was afraid to move, as if walking inside might break the spell. But mostly, I just wanted to savor the moment. After years of putting everyone else's needs before my own, I was about to step into a chapter that belonged solely to me. I had no idea that before I even unpacked my boxes, my family would arrive with plans that would test every boundary I had worked so hard to build. The quiet pride I felt standing on that porch didn't last long. Before I could even step inside, the rumble of engines broke the silence. Dust kicked up as not one, but 2 vehicles pulled into my driveway, my parents' Buick and my brother Brooks's oversized SUV. My stomach sank. I had only texted them my new address an hour earlier. I expected maybe a phone call, a congratulatory message, something small. But not this. Doors slammed in quick succession. My mother emerged first, silver blonde hair perfectly styled despite the 5-hour drive from Portland. My father followed with his usual no-nonsense expression. Then Brooks climbed out, his wife Marin trailing behind him, and finally their 3 kids tumbled out like marbles spilling onto my lawn. They ran across the grass I had just paid to seed, their laughter slicing through what I thought was going to be a peaceful afternoon. "Ellis, there you are," my mom called out, as if I might have somehow missed this family caravan descending on me. Behind her, Brooks popped open the SUV's trunk and revealed something that made my pulse spike: suitcases. Not just a weekend bag. Full-sized luggage. Cardboard boxes. The kind of things you bring when you plan to stay. I gripped the keys tighter in my palm, the metal edges biting into my skin. "What's all this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended but still too small compared to the storm forming in front of me. My mom's smile faltered as she glanced at the house, then back at me. "Well, we've come to move in, of course." She lowered her voice like she was sharing a private secret. "But Ellis, where do we sleep?" The ground seemed to tilt under me. "Move in?" The word lodged in my throat. This house, this hard-earned, long-fought-for sanctuary, was suddenly being claimed by people who hadn't lifted a finger to earn it. Brooks was already hauling one of the heavier suitcases onto the porch. "Don't play dumb, Ellis," he said casually. "We've been planning this for months." "Planning this?" His words hit like a slap. My mind scrambled back to last month's family dinner at my parents' house. I had mentioned, maybe too proudly, that I'd finally qualified for a mortgage. Mom had clapped her hands together. "Our new home," she had said. I'd frowned at the "our," but before I could correct her, Brooks had pulled out his phone, showing me listings of sprawling houses far beyond my budget. At the time, I stayed quiet. A lifetime of experience had taught me that saying no to them only led to disappointment, their disappointment in me. I had assumed they'd eventually realize their mistake, that they couldn't possibly believe I was buying a house for all of them. But here they were, standing in my driveway, boxes in hand, acting like I was the one being unreasonable. "This is my home," I said now, my voice firmer than I felt. "I bought it for myself." My mom's laugh was quick, dismissive, like I had just said something silly. "Don't be ridiculous, Ellis. We've been planning this move for months. Your father already gave notice at work." Her words pressed against my chest like a weight. "Notice at work?" My dad nodded, confirming it. Brooks leaned in closer, towering over me. That same condescending smirk he used to wear when we were kids, and he convinced me to take the blame for things he broke. "She's pretending she didn't promise to help us," he said to my parents, not even looking at me. "Promise?" I repeated, heat rising in my face. "I never." "Ellis," my father cut in, his tone sharp and familiar, the same tone that once preceded punishments. "Your brother's given up his apartment. The children are already enrolled in school here." The words crashed down like waves, each one heavier than the last. It wasn't just an assumption. It was a full-scale takeover. They had orchestrated entire life changes around my sacrifice, as though my savings, my credit, and my future were theirs to direct. For years, I had been the responsible one, the one who quietly shouldered the burdens while Brooks floundered from one failed venture to another. And now, once again, I was expected to fix everything at the cost of my own life. Brooks placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to remind me of his size, his dominance. He leaned in, lowering his voice, so only I could hear. "If you don't help your own family, Ellis, who will?" The house behind me suddenly felt fragile, like a prize I might lose before I'd even had the chance to claim it. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about property. It was about whether I had the courage to say no and mean it. For 3 days after that driveway confrontation, my house was silent, but not peaceful. I lived in a strange limbo, boxes still unopened, furniture waiting to be arranged. My family had retreated back to Portland, leaving me with both relief and dread. Relief because I had pushed back, at least temporarily. Dread because I knew them well enough to realize they weren't finished. That dread became reality one afternoon when I tapped open a new email notification. I expected something routine from work, but instead the subject line froze me cold. "Morgan Family Dream Home Purchase Agreement Ready." At first I thought it was spam, some mistake from a realtor. But then I saw my name, Ellis Morgan, primary applicant. My heart kicked against my ribs as I opened the attached files. Line after line confirmed the impossible. A $768,000 house in Riverside Estates, co-signed in my name. My financial information was there, my credit score, even a $2,000 hold already processed on my card. I sank onto one of the still-sealed moving boxes, my hands trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped. My mother hadn't just assumed my help. She had stolen it. She had used my identity, my financial security, everything I had worked for, without a single word to me. The walls seemed to tilt as I stared at the paperwork. It felt like all 9 years of sacrifice were unraveling in front of me. This wasn't about inconvenience anymore. This was theft. Fraud. Betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect me. An hour later, the doorbell rang. My family walked in as if nothing was wrong. My mother led the way, rifling through my mail as though it were her own. My father checked his watch impatiently. Brooks paced, his confidence filling the space like he owned it. "You look awful," Mom said matter-of-factly, her eyes flicking over me. "Have you even been sleeping?" I didn't answer. Instead, I held up the realtor's email, the pages of the purchase agreement I had printed out in desperation. "You used my name without permission," I said, my voice cracking with fury. Mom barely glanced at the stack of evidence. She waved it away as if it were no more serious than a misplaced lipstick. "Don't be dramatic, Ellis. I simply initiated the process. You would have been consulted before anything was finalized." "Consulted?" My throat tightened. "You put a $2,000 hold using my payment information. That's not consultation. That's theft." Brooks stopped pacing, turning his smirk toward me. Strong words for family helping family. "Helping me?" I spat. How exactly were you helping me by making me responsible for a house I can't afford? It's an investment. My father interjected as though I were a stubborn child. The schools there are excellent. We've already enrolled the kids. The casual tone, the assumption behind every word, it cut deeper than anger. They weren't just pushing boundaries. They were building entire futures on the foundation of my sacrifice, with no thought to whether I agreed. Brooks leaned against my kitchen counter like he was sealing a business deal. I've already given notice at my job, he said. 2 weeks and I'm officially a Ben resident. Each revelation stacked on the last until I could barely breathe. They had terminated leases, given up jobs, enrolled children in schools, all on the assumption that I would bankroll their lives. It wasn't just arrogance. It was entrapment. This stops now, I said, gathering the papers into a neat stack with trembling hands. I'm not buying that house. I'm not co-signing a loan. I'm not funding your relocation. Mom's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed, perfectly rehearsed. If your credit score drops because of this, our scores will fall even further. We'll never qualify for anything decent. Brooks chimed in smoothly. Our rental agreement is already terminated. You're destroying this family. The words were daggers, each one sharpened to pierce my guilt. My father added the final twist. After everything we've sacrificed for you, Ellis, something inside me snapped. Sacrificed? My voice rose, louder than I had ever dared in front of them. You want to talk about sacrifice? Let me show you. I reached for the budget book I had kept for nearly a decade. Every page was a record of skipped meals out, vacations foregone, overtime shifts worked. 65% of every paycheck, saved with ruthless discipline. This, I said, holding it up, is what sacrifice looks like. Not draining my savings. Not forging my name. Not using my credit as if it's yours. For a moment, the room went silent. Even Brooks looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. My father scoffed, brushing it aside. Everyone has to budget, Ellis. Not Brooks, I shot back. Not when you emptied my college tuition account for his coffee shop that lasted 6 months. Mom bristled. That was an investment. In him, I said sharply. Never in me. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. For once, they had no quick rebuttal. No ready guilt trip. Only silence. And in that silence, I realized something. They weren't going to stop unless I made them stop. If I thought my firm no had ended things, I was wrong. It didn't end anything, it only changed their strategy. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail, only to hear a distant cousin's voice leaving a message about helping family in need. Then another call. And another. By noon, I had missed 7 calls, all from people I barely spoke to, all repeating the same vague plea. Ellis, do the right thing. I didn't need to ask where it was coming from. Brooks had always been good at building narratives, especially when they made him look like the hero and someone else the villain. This time, I was the villain. And his campaign was in full swing. By the end of the second day, my Facebook messages were flooded. Old family acquaintances I hadn't seen since childhood were suddenly writing long, emotional notes about sacrifice, about how children need stability, about how selfishness ruins families. My brother's carefully crafted post about a family crisis had spread like wildfire. Words like homeless and prayers needed painted me as the cold-hearted sibling who abandoned her own blood. I silenced my phone and flipped it face down on the counter, but it didn't stop. The landline, my emergency backup that only 5 people have the number to, began ringing. Against my better judgment, I answered. Ellis, it's Grandma Joanne. My chest tightened. Grandma, the family matriarch, the one who sent me birthday checks and knitted scarves every Christmas. We rarely spoke beyond pleasantries, but her opinion carried weight. I don't understand what's happening, she said, her voice wavering with practiced fragility. Brooks says you've left them homeless. That's not true, I said quickly, panic rising. They decided. She didn't let me finish. Family takes care of family. I've always included you equally in my will, Ellis. But I need to know you understand what that means. It means responsibility. It means sacrifice. Her words weren't just disappointment. They were a threat. A reminder that even my financial future outside of this house could be dangled and withdrawn at their whim. I swallowed hard. Grandma, I saved for 9 years to buy this house. They assumed it was for them without ever asking me. "Well," she said after a long pause, her voice hardening, "I never thought you'd be so selfish." The line went dead. I sank onto the floor, pressing my forehead to my knees. They were winning. Even from miles away, they were finding ways to make me doubt myself. Was I really selfish? Was I really betraying my family by drawing this line? Memories surfaced unbidden, sharp and bitter. Senior year of college. Discovering my tuition account empty. My mother's casual tone on the phone. "We had to help Brooks with the coffee shop." "You'll figure something out." "You always do." I had figured it out. I worked 60-hour weeks while finishing my degree. I ate instant oatmeal for months because it was all I could afford. I scraped and clawed my way through, and no one apologized, not once. Now here they were, doing it again. Only this time, the stakes weren't just tuition. They were my entire future. My phone buzzed again. I expected another cousin, another guilt trip. But it was Marin, my sister-in-law. The message was short. "I understand why you said no. I would have done the same." I read it 3 times, the words glowing like a fragile flame in the storm. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of validation. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe saying no didn't make me a monster. Still, the calls kept coming. Aunt Patty crying on the phone about that poor boy and his children. A second cousin demanding to know if I could live with myself if Brooks's kids suffered. Each word was meant to pin me in a corner, to force me into submission through shame. But every time I looked at my bungalow, the walls I had paid for, the mortgage in my name, the space I had carved out of nearly a decade of sacrifice, I reminded myself of one truth. If I gave in now, I'd be surrendering not just a house, but my independence forever. The pressure campaign was suffocating. But a single text from Marin reminded me there might still be people who understood. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep standing my ground. When the calls from relatives became unbearable, I shut my phone off completely. But even in the silence, their voices lived in my head. Selfish, ungrateful, destroying the family. I curled up on the couch, hugging my budget book against my chest. That worn notebook had been with me for nearly a decade, tracking every dollar I earned, every choice I made to secure this home. Its pages weren't just numbers. They were memories. Sacrifices frozen in ink. I opened it, running my fingers over the cramped handwriting. 9 years ago, I had whispered a promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I let them make me financially vulnerable. That promise had roots in pain. My senior year of college, I logged into my tuition account one morning to find it empty. I remember staring at the screen, my stomach dropping, convinced it was a glitch. But the withdrawal slip bore my mother's name. She admitted it casually over the phone, as if it were nothing. "We had to help Brooks with the coffee shop. You'll figure something out." "You always do." And I did figure it out. I worked 60-hour weeks while carrying a full course load. I juggled classes with double shifts at a diner, coming home to a cramped studio at 2 in the morning, exhausted and too wired to sleep. Dinner was packets of instant oatmeal, 19 cents each from the discount store. My hands cracked from constant dishwashing. My grades nearly slipped. But I refused to drop out. That coffee shop closed within months. My tuition debt lingered for years. And no one in my family ever apologized. That was when the promise was born. Standing in my tiny bathroom, staring at my hollow-eyed reflection, I whispered it aloud. Never again. They will never make me financially vulnerable again. From that moment on, I built my life around discipline. I tracked every expense. I skipped vacations even when coworkers begged me to join. I packed lunches while colleagues ordered takeout. I bought secondhand furniture, patched old clothes, and turned down every temptation to just enjoy life a little. 65% of every paycheck went straight into savings. It meant saying no when friends invited me on road trips. It meant learning to be content with solitude while others built families and memories. It meant silence, patience, endurance, all for the vision of one day unlocking the door to a place that was mine. And now, after nearly a decade of holding fast to that promise, my family wanted to rewrite my sacrifice as their entitlement. I thought of the photo albums tucked on my shelf, the empty chairs at my milestones, my high school graduation, where they'd skipped out for a fishing trip, My scholarship ceremony, where Brooks's baseball game took precedence. My art show, my promotion party, my design award, all attended by friends, never family. The message was always the same. I was only valuable when I was useful to them. Even now, as they pushed me to co-sign a house I couldn't afford, their arguments weren't about my happiness. They were about their needs, their jobs, their children, their convenience. A wave of anger rose, sharp and hot, but beneath it was something deeper. Grief. Grief for the years I had given away. For the trust I had poured into people who saw me as a resource, not a daughter, not a sister. I closed the budget book gently, my hands steadier than before. Every line in those pages told me one truth. If I gave in now, it wouldn't just be about losing a house. It would mean betraying the version of myself who had carried me this far. The Ellis who worked double shifts, who ate instant oatmeal, who swore never again. I couldn't do that to her. Not again. Not ever. In the middle of the storm, it was easy to feel like I was drowning alone. But the truth was, not everyone in my life demanded pieces of me until nothing was left. Some people showed up in quieter, steadier ways. Noelle was one of them. She had been my friend since college, the kind who celebrated every tiny milestone even when no one else bothered. When my parents skipped my first design award ceremony, she drove 6 hours just to clap the loudest in the audience. When I finally signed the mortgage papers, she showed up with champagne and a box of moving tape, joking that she'd help me drink one and use the other. 3 days after my family's ambush, Noelle appeared at my apartment door carrying 2 empty boxes and that same unshakable smile. She didn't ask permission to come in. She didn't scold me for the half-packed chaos scattered around. She just looked me in the eye and asked, "Ready for the next load?" Her words cut through the suffocating guilt like sunlight through storm clouds. In front of my family, who were still circling like vultures, she spoke as if they weren't even there, as if their demands weren't the only narrative. For a moment, I could breathe. Brooks tried to block her path. "Give us a minute," he said, reaching for her arm. But Noelle sidestepped him effortlessly. "Ellis and I have a schedule," she said, her tone crisp but calm. The trucks only rented until 7. It was such a small exchange, yet it felt monumental. While my family demanded, manipulated, and cornered me, Noelle simply supported. No guilt. No conditions. Just presence. Later, when I was reeling from Grandma's call and the endless barrage of accusations, my phone buzzed again. I expected another guilt trip. Instead, it was Marin. Her text was simple. "I understand why you said no." I would have done the same. I read it 3 times, blinking back tears. Marin wasn't someone I had expected to be on my side. Married to Brooks, she usually stood in his shadow, nodding along with his plans. But in those 10 words, she offered something my own parents hadn't in years, understanding. That tiny spark of solidarity mattered more than I could admit. It reminded me I wasn't unreasonable. I wasn't the monster Brooks's Facebook campaign painted me to be. Someone who lived inside the same walls, who saw the same entitlement every day, recognized that my no wasn't cruelty, it was survival. In the days that followed, Noelle and Marin became my anchors. Noelle with her steady, unapologetic support. Marin with her quiet validation. They were proof that real connection doesn't demand exploitation, that love doesn't come with conditions or ultimatums. For years, I had believed my worth to family was measured by how much I gave up. But in their presence, I began to see another possibility, that maybe I deserved relationships where I didn't have to bleed myself dry just to be accepted. And slowly, I started to believe that standing my ground wasn't selfish. It was necessary. The morning sun poured through the windows of my bungalow, casting golden light across the hardwood floors I had chosen myself. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a half-finished dream. My furniture was in place, my books lined the shelves, my diploma and blueprints hung proudly on the wall. It finally looked like what it was meant to be, my home. I had barely begun to enjoy that calm when the doorbell rang. My pulse quickened. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. My mother stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes darting over every surface like she was already rearranging it in her mind. My father followed, his eyebrows rising as he took in the fully furnished living room. And then Brooks pushed through, his stride confident until he stopped short at the sight of the carefully arranged space. "You've already moved in," Mom said flatly, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule by not waiting for them. Brooks scanned the room, his expression tightening. "Where's the space for our stuff?" "There isn't any," I said, my voice steady. "Would you like some coffee?" I just made a fresh pot. They blinked at me, clearly thrown by the calmness in my tone. For once, I wasn't defensive. I wasn't scrambling to justify myself. I was standing in my home, and that gave me strength. Brooks recovered first, turning to our parents. "She's just pretending. She'll come around." "She always does." But before he could continue, there was a knock at the open window. My neighbor Harold was watering his rose bushes, his hose still dripping as he looked over. Brooks had slipped outside, gesturing toward the house, smiling like a salesman. "Moving in this weekend," he told Harold confidently. "Ellis has been so generous to let us stay here while we settle in." I cracked the window just enough to hear Harold's reply. "Really? That's not what Ellis told me. She said this was her first place all to herself after 9 years of saving. Even showed me the single occupant paperwork from the hoe." Brooks froze. When he turned, Marin was standing behind him, arms crossed, her expression sharp. "Single occupant paperwork?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly into the house. "You told me Ellis had agreed we were all moving in." Brooks stammered, his usual confidence faltering. "She changed her mind. She's being selfish." Marin's eyes narrowed. "Like when she supposedly offered you $5,000 last year, money she never actually agreed to give?" The air thickened with tension. For once, Brooks had no comeback. He turned back toward the porch, but Marin didn't move aside. She had heard enough. I closed the window gently and turned back to find my mother rifling through my spice rack. "Ellis," she said sharply, "you need to be reasonable. We're not asking you to give us anything. Just co-sign the loan. You can keep this little starter home. We'll have the bigger house." Dad chimed in, his tone measured but firm. "It's the sensible solution. You don't have dependents, Ellis. We do. It's time you thought about the bigger picture." Brooks paced behind them like a shark circling prey. "Family duty isn't optional. Either you're with us or you're cutting yourself off from this family." The words hung in the air like a threat. For a moment, that old panic squeezed my chest. The fear of being the outcast, the disappointment in their eyes, the crushing guilt. But then I looked around at the walls of my bungalow. At the diploma, the blueprints, the shelves filled with books I had chosen. The evidence of my life, built piece by piece without their help. The fear dissolved. What replaced it was something steadier, stronger. I stood tall. This is my home. I bought it. I earned it. And I'm not co-signing anything. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling with rehearsed fragility. "How can you be so selfish?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm finally being selfish. And I'm done betraying myself to keep everyone else comfortable." The silence that followed was electric. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Brooks's jaw tightened, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. For once, I wasn't backing down. They thought they could walk into my home and claim it. But I wasn't the same Ellis who swallowed my protests at family dinners. I wasn't the Ellis who worked 60-hour weeks while they drained my tuition. I was the Ellis who had said never again. And I meant it. For a long moment after my refusal, no one spoke. My parents sat stiffly on the sofa, my mother's fingers worrying the strand of pearls at her throat, my father tapping his knee like he was calculating next moves. Brooks paced restlessly, his confidence flickering but not yet gone. Then Marin stepped fully inside. Her gaze didn't leave Brooks. "Single occupant paperwork," she repeated, her voice cool. "You knew Ellis never agreed to all of us moving in, but you told me she had. You made me uproot our kids, quit my job, leave everything behind, for a lie." Brooks's mouth opened and closed, scrambling for his usual excuses. "It wasn't a lie. She changed her mind, Marin. She promised," but the words rang hollow. The evidence was everywhere. My furnished home. The paperwork Harold had seen. The way I stood firmly in front of them, not wavering. "You always do this," Marin said, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. "You spin stories, make promises you can't keep, and drag everyone else down with you. And then you call it sacrifice. My father tried to interject. Now let's not overreact, but Marin shook her head sharply. No, this isn't overreaction. This is truth. You told me Ellis offered us money last year. She hadn't. You told me she agreed to buy a bigger house for the family. She didn't. Every time things fall apart, you invent a version where it's not your fault. Brooks's face flushed red, his eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Marin snapped. I've lived it. The silence that followed was heavier than before. My parents exchanged another glance, this one tinged not with certainty, but with unease. Their golden boy, the one they had always protected and excused, was being called out, and not just by me, by his own wife. I felt something shift in the room. For the first time, I wasn't the lone voice fighting a tide of manipulation. Someone else was speaking the truth out loud, dismantling Brooks's stories brick by brick. Brooks tried one last attempt at charm, turning to our parents. You see what's happening? She's turning against me because Ellis poisoned her. This is what happens when family forgets loyalty. But the words fell flat. Marin's arms were crossed, her stance immovable. Harold's voice still echoed from outside, confirming my independence. The house itself stood as proof of everything I'd built. My mother finally spoke, her voice strained. But what about the Riverside house? We've already put money down. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. That's your problem, not mine. I didn't authorize it. I won't pay for it. And I won't be responsible for fixing your poor decisions. For once, no one interrupted me. Not even Dad. It was Brooks who broke the silence, his voice low and simmering with anger. You're making a mistake, Ellis. You think you've won, but families don't just cut each other off. You'll regret this. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But as I looked at Marin, standing tall in defiance of his lies, I knew one thing for certain. He was no longer in control of the story. And that crack in his facade, it was only the beginning. The air in my living room crackled with tension. My parents perched on the sofa like judges presiding over a trial. Brooks paced behind them, his jaw clenched, hands clasped like a man preparing to deliver a verdict. They had regrouped, recalibrated, and now they were ready for their final assault. Ellis, my mother began, her voice honeyed with that familiar mix of condescension and manipulation. Be reasonable. We're not asking you to give us anything. Just co-sign the loan. You'll keep this little starter house. She glanced around my living room, her lips tightening at its modest size. And we'll have the bigger home. Everyone wins. Dad nodded, his smile thin but deliberate. It's the sensible solution. You don't have dependents. No children. No real responsibilities. Brooks does. It's your duty to think about the bigger picture. I studied them, noticing how carefully they had positioned themselves. My parents on the sofa, facing me like a jury. Brooks circling behind, his looming presence designed to intimidate. It was choreographed, rehearsed. They'd likely practiced their lines in the rental car on the way over. Then Brooks leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. If you refuse, you're effectively cutting yourself off from this family. Is that what you want? To be alone? The threat hung in the air. And for a split second, old instincts stirred. The panic of being cast out. The ache of never quite belonging. But then my eyes swept across the room. The shelves stacked with architecture books I had bought myself. The diploma I had earned without their support. The blueprints of the bungalow framed above the fireplace. My home. My life. Mine. The fear ebbed away. What replaced it was something steadier, stronger. I stood, my voice calm but resolute. I've been financially independent since college. Despite what you all did to me. Despite what we all know you did. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. We supported you. No, I cut in, my tone sharp. You drained my tuition account for Brooks's coffee shop. I had to work 2 jobs while finishing my degree. You called it an investment. But it was never in me. It was always in him. My father shifted uncomfortably, his rehearsed lines faltering. Brooks scoffed, trying to recapture control. So what? You want a medal for being boring? For living like a monk while everyone else had a life? I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I have a life. One I built piece by piece. You keep saying I'm betraying the family. But the truth is, I'm done betraying myself. The silence that followed was thick and electric, like the space between lightning and thunder. This is ridiculous, Brooks snapped finally, his voice rising. We've given notice at our apartment. The kids are enrolled in school here. Dad quit his job. You can't just back out now. I shook my head slowly, each word deliberate. Your poor planning is not my emergency. Mom's eyes narrowed, her voice trembling with outrage. We raised you better than this. I took a breath, considering her words carefully. Maybe you did. You raised me to work hard, to honor my commitments, to be responsible. That's exactly what I'm doing now. I worked hard. I saved. And I bought this house. My house. I crossed to the door, opening it wide. The cool evening air swept inside, crisp and clarifying. From my pocket, I pulled the spare key I had discovered in my mother's purse days earlier, a copy she'd had made without my consent. I set it on the entry table with a deliberate click. You don't get to decide what my success looks like, I said. You don't get to claim what I earned as communal property. This is my home bought, earned, and chosen by me. Brooks's face darkened, disbelief giving way to fury. After everything we've done for you, this is my home, I interrupted firmly. And the answer is no. My mother rose unsteadily, her eyes glistening with tears. How can you be so selfish? Family helps family. Yes, I said softly. Family helps. But help isn't the same as sacrifice. And help isn't exploitation. I'm not asking you to leave my life. Just my house. One by one, they filed past me. My father first, avoiding my eyes. Brooks next, his jaw locked tight. My mother last, lingering at the threshold, her hand reaching out. Ellis, she whispered. Please. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time, I didn't see the untouchable matriarch of my childhood. I saw a woman who had never learned to stand on her own. I love you, I told her quietly. But this answer is still no, and with that, I closed the door. Not with a slam of anger, but with the quiet finality of someone who had drawn a line and meant it. The silence after they left was almost deafening. No shouting, no guilt-laden arguments echoing off the walls. Just stillness. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and breathed deeply. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, the air in my lungs felt like it belonged to me. But freedom has its own kind of weight. The days that followed passed strangely, each one quieter than the last. My phone stayed dark. No calls from my parents. No texts from Brooks. No sudden messages from relatives trying to twist the knife. At first, the absence felt like punishment, as if their silence was proof I had finally crossed the line and exiled myself from the family. Yet gradually, the silence shifted. It stopped feeling like exile and began to feel like space. Space to breathe. Space to exist without constantly defending my choices. Through neighbors and the small-town grapevine, I heard pieces of what came next. Brooks and his family had found a small rental across town. 2 bedrooms for 5 people, tight and imperfect, but manageable. My father's job search hadn't gone smoothly, and my parents were stretched thin. There were whispers of arguments, of tension, of the reality finally settling in that I wasn't going to bail them out. I didn't celebrate their struggle, but I didn't shoulder it either. For the first time in my life, their chaos wasn't my emergency. 34 days after I closed the door on them, my phone buzzed with a new message. Marin. She had sent a photo, Brooks painting the living room of their rental, the children with rollers in their hands, paint splattered across their clothes and faces. They were laughing, the kind of laughter that made the mess seem less like a problem and more like a memory. Beneath the photo, her message was simple. Thank you. I think we needed this reset more than we knew. I stared at it for a long time, not sure what to feel. Relief? Sadness? Hope? Maybe all of it at once. What I did know was this. My family's story had shifted. They were forced to live within their means, to build something for themselves instead of leaning on me. And I was no longer carrying the weight of their choices. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no hugs, no apologies, no miraculous reconciliation. But there was peace. And for me, peace was enough. 3 months into homeownership, my bungalow finally felt alive. The walls that had once echoed with doubt now held laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of friendship. Noel raised her glass one evening, her smile glowing in the warm light of the vintage floor lamp I had restored. "To Ellis," she declared, "who taught us all that saying no can be the beginning of something beautiful." I didn't deflect the compliment the way I once would have. I didn't shrink or apologize. I simply lifted my own glass and let the words settle in. Around me sat people who had celebrated every milestone, my neighbors, my coworkers, the ones who showed up without conditions or expectations. For the first time, I was surrounded by support that didn't demand a piece of me in return. On the wall beside us hung a gallery of my milestones. My architecture degree, photos from hiking trips I'd taken alone, the certificate from my first professional award. Not a single one of them was overshadowed by someone else's disappointment. They weren't tucked away in a drawer. They were visible, unapologetically mine. The house itself became a sanctuary. My mornings started with quiet sunlight across the dining table. My evenings ended with the simple joy of knowing every choice inside these walls was mine alone. Even the small details, the doormat Noel had given me with my name on it, the blueprints framed above the fireplace, whispered a truth I had fought hard to claim. This is yours. But the story wasn't entirely about distance. One Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang at exactly 6:30. I opened it to find my mother holding a small box of cinnamon cookies, the ones she used to bake when I was little and had achieved something worth celebrating. For the first time in a long while, she didn't walk in uninvited. She waited. We sat at my kitchen table in silence at first, the weight of everything unsaid settling between us. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, moving slowly, deliberately. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't apologize for the modesty of my home. I simply existed within the boundaries I had built. Finally, she spoke. "This is a lovely home, Ellis." The words sounded unpracticed, tentative, perhaps the first genuine compliment I had heard from her in years. It wasn't a sweeping apology. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it was a beginning. And that was enough. Later that week, my backyard filled with friends again. Marin sat at the patio table, watching her children explore the garden. She had left Brooks the month before, her quiet courage earning her a place in what Noel jokingly called the Boundary Brigade. My elderly neighbor Janet brought strawberry shortcake. Another dropped off a potted herb garden. We raised our glasses as the sunset painted the sky in strokes of orange and violet. "To new beginnings," Marin said softly, "and boundaries worth keeping." I smiled, feeling the words settle deep in my chest. Because this was what I had fought for, not just 4 walls and a mortgage, but the freedom to choose who belonged inside them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was surrounded by people who loved me not for what I could give, but for who I was. And as the laughter carried into the evening, I realized that drawing boundaries hadn't destroyed my life. It had built it. Sometimes I wonder if protecting your future is worth the price of disappointing the people who raised you. There's no easy answer to that. Drawing a boundary isn't just about saying no, it's about holding that line when everyone pushes against it. For me, the price was steep. I lost my family's approval. I endured weeks of silence, accusations, and guilt. I became the villain in their version of the story. And yet, when I walk through my bungalow each morning, sunlight streaming across the floors I chose, I know I made the right decision. Because this home isn't just walls and a roof. It's the embodiment of 9 years of sacrifice. It's a promise I made to myself, finally fulfilled. It's proof that my life, my choices, and my future belong to me, not to anyone else. Still, there are moments of doubt. Moments when my mother's words echo, "How can you be so selfish?" But then I remember that love without respect is just control, and family without boundaries is just exploitation. I didn't close the door on love. I closed the door on entitlement. And in doing so, I found something better. Space to breathe, people who value me for who I am, and a life that finally feels like my own. So now I turn the question to you. If you were in my shoes, if your family expected to take over the life you worked years to build, would you compromise to keep the peace? Or would you stand firm, knowing it might mean walking away? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't saying yes. It's saying no.